Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is the last of our four-part series. Today, we are covering the Mastering of Application Writing and New Market Tax Credits webinar. It's the last of our four-part series, as I mentioned. We have all of those available online if you missed any of them and you're interested in checking any of the former sessions out. My name is Laurel Tinsley. I'm a partner at Bekaert. I have the privilege of leading the amazing, impactful team that is the Strategic Financing Services team. In this webinar today, we will be covering an overview of the new market tax credit application process and some best practices that extend beyond just the new market tax credits as one of those kinds of applications you may write. There are many other applications you could write to the CDFI Fund, and some of the best practices are transferable. So we'll be covering some of the new market tax credit application process best practices, equipping participants with the foundational skills they may need to navigate their way through the complexity of the new market tax credit application writing process. And that will go up beyond just writing the application and submitting it to what happens next after you submit your application, and a few compliance and reporting tips. I'm pleased to introduce our speakers for today. I'm joined today by Julia Elric, a manager in the Strategic Financing Services team. Julia, you want to say hi to folks?
Hey everyone, my name is Julia Elric. I'm the New Markets Tax Credit Applications Manager here at Cherry Bekaert, and I've been in the new market tax credit industry for about 18 years and written several dozen applications. So I'm excited to have joined the Cherry Bekaert applications team this year.
We're really excited to have you with us, and we know your expertise will really help our clients through the process. And today, you'll be able to guide some people who have maybe not been through the process before. Ethan Gil-Belchi is also joining us today on our series. Ethan, you want to join and just tell people hello and introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Ethan Gilberti. I've been with Cherry Bekaert for about 3 years, and I'm an application writer for Cherry Bekaert's Strategic Financing Services team.
Thank you, guys. I'm sure the crowd is waiting to hear what you have to say. First, we'll start with just a little bit of the housekeeping items. I think I may have gone over the learning objectives, and so we've covered those. But I also really like to start with a sense of where are we and what's happening. So if you all are checking out the news, you know that we're eagerly awaiting new market tax credit awards. At the same time, we may be headed for a government shutdown, although we haven't had one since, just looked this up, 2018, 2019, there was a 35-day shutdown. But if there is a shutdown, that will sort of delay some of the timing in the new market tax credit industry. So we're currently, since we have a permanent program, we're excitedly awaiting the last round's awards and then the release of the next round of applications. Again, if all of that were to go to plan, then those awards should be coming out in any day now. They could be out in sometime in the month of October or November, but if the government shuts down, then the delay will happen invariably, and we may be waiting a little bit longer to see who won last year's awards. Regardless of all of that, the awards will come out at some point, and then we will have the next new market tax credit application released. That's called a NOAA, Notice of Allocation Availability, and that should be hopefully out by at least around the end of the year, early part of 2026. So we are also having great news currently for anybody who was thinking about joining the program now that we have new market tax credit permanence, because the CDE certification application, which was paused for a period of time, is now opened again. So if you were waiting for that to reopen to make your application and become a certified CDE, don't wait. Get your application in, because you need to be certified in order to write a new market tax credit application. This permanent will invariably lead to probably a larger number of applicants each year. It's unclear how many new people will be joining the ranks this round, but you can imagine that more people who have been thinking about joining the ranks and applying for new market tax credits will take the leap and do that now. There is no cost of living adjuster, but we have gotten a $5 billion allocation annually award in the Permanence One Big Beautiful Bill Act. So we're excited to have that. We've come from having just 3.5 billion not too many years ago. So 5 billion should do a great job, especially with $10 billion coming out in this next round of awards. With having set the stage, I always like to talk for a little while before we give you this first poll question. As was mentioned in the introduction, please make sure that you answer at least 3 out of the 4 poll questions so that you can get CPE credit if that is something you're interested in. So in the polling question now, we've told you a little bit about ourselves. Would you tell us a little bit about you? Who are you? Are you from a nonprofit organization? Are you a project manager, a local government agency, a developer, consultant? If none of the question answers seem like they're right for you, please select other and feel free to drop in the chat any additional information about your organization and what brings you here today. We can't have this be actual conversation since it's one-way Zoom, but we welcome any questions you may have. Feel free to just open the chat at any time. So like I said, you have to enter at least 3 out of 4 of these. So if you haven't voted, please do that. And here we go. We've gotten a lot of great responses. So there's a lot of nonprofits in our audience today, some government departments, developers, consultants. So it looks like we've got a nice mix of people, and we should hit topics that are interesting to each of you. So I will turn it over now to Julia, who will talk you through preliminary readiness assessment. Take it away, Julia.
Thanks so much, Laura. So this section is going to focus kind of drilling down into the application itself. It's a very large application, so there's plenty to go over. We'll start with a preliminary readiness assessment. So some of these things can be basics for a new applicant, but also some of these assessments should be standard for an applicant going through each round, really. The first step is to really utilize your resources. So you can attend conferences, a Q&A webinar like this one that you're attending now, reading the FAQ and other guidance documents that the CDFI Fund provides on their website. And you can even look at the searchable awards database on the CDFI Fund website as well to kind of look at maybe who's won before and what sort of goals they've set for themselves, and see whether you align with that and what has succeeded before. You can also connect with industry experts. So is your CDE ready for new markets? The prerequisites really kind of big picture. It's great to have your overall track record, but then you'll want to drill down to a 5-year track record of data that will then inform a strategic plan or investment strategy for how you want to move forward with your application. And you should always have a policies and procedures either written up or something that you got in process and may need to update. And then you'll want to develop a pipeline. So you'll look for projects in your service area that would qualify, be qualified low-income investments, and really want to loop that back in so it fits your strategic plan and investment strategy. And then you are at a good stage to start an application. So what are some of the risks? As I mentioned, this is a very large application. It is very detailed. But if you don't try, then you don't know. So there is some opportunity cost. If you spend the resources and time on this proposal or project, what are you not going to be able to do with that same time and resources? It is a very intensive application. Even the CDFI asks within the application how many hours it takes us. I don't know that any of us is fully honest with how long we spend. There can also be a cost of delay. So new markets is an annual application. So it's not rolling. There aren't multiple times of year when you can apply. It's just once a year. And then there is that delay before the awards are announced. So thinking about, does your project make sense within that kind of time frame? And then do you have the foundation and expertise to administer the program or manage the resources that you're asking for in the awards? So that's kind of the preliminary upfront, and then we're going to jump into the application itself. So I'm going to go through more of the overall application and the sections. So you'll see here, these are pieces of the application itself. Each section has its own kind of goal, and you'll note that the applicant information, and then parts 1 and 2, business strategy and community outcomes, those are the ones that are reviewed in the first round by readers selected by the CDFI. And then 3 through 5, those are going to be reviewed in the money round by the CDFI. So that's kind of how some of these break down. But these are all the components and pieces that you'll need to pull together in order to create a competitive application. So the first section, kind of your business applicant information. So this is talking about who you are as an applicant. There are limited places to kind of introduce yourself with the narrative limitations of the application, but you should really have your organization's mission and goals set up for yourself and then threaded throughout the application. So you'll want to talk about who your organization is, establish your credibility, and this can include talking about your mission, vision, and values, the history of the work that you've been doing, what your service area is, the scope of it and range, and then the different programs and services that you've been providing and who's been benefiting from them. So really building up that track record. Okay, and then this is going to be the business strategy section. So again, as I noted before, this is the prior section was more about the applicant information. The business strategy is now a scored section, whereas the applicant information is not scored. You'll start with looking at the different types of projects that you would invest in, and then looking at your own financial products. You can opt in for up to 3 different ones that you would be interested in providing for the new markets application. They should all be distinct if you choose to do more than one. And then each of those, you'll want to detail the different rates and terms that you'd be willing to offer. So below market interest rates, lower than standard origination fees, higher loan to value ratios, things like that. And then you want to compare what you would be willing to provide to the market to show that you're offering these better rates and terms. And then that will be something that you commit to within this application. And then you'll want to talk about that pipeline that we talked about developing. So what does it look like? What business types are you investing in? And within that range of pipeline that you've gotten together, you'll have a lot of projects. How are you going to prioritize them? And then how much new market allocation do these likely need, which will help inform how much you're asking for in an award. And then we'll get into talking about kind of your due diligence. So what types of initial underwriting are you going to perform? Because for the new market tax credit program specifically, this is a 7-year compliance period. And so you really want to make sure that you've done the underwriting to ensure that your borrowers are going to remain financially viable for the next 7 years, but also that they remain in those qualifying low-income areas. So you'll really want to support everything with your prior performance. Now, in terms of prior performance, you can have both QLICI-like as well as non-QLICI-like. So QLICI-like is usually something that would qualify as new markets, whether you've done new markets or not. A project that could have received new markets would be QLICI-like. But non-QLICI-like doesn't mean it's not similar. It could just mean that it was done in a restricted use, such as 100% rental housing. So we'll look at how have you deployed your QLICIs in the past 5 years? Have you lent to real estate or operating businesses? What does that track record look like? And is it reflected similarly in your pipeline? And have you been lending to those similar disadvantaged businesses and communities? And then I listed a few other non-QLICI types, such as agriculture, golf courses, country clubs, the usual businesses that are not, they're restricted from being used with new markets. Now, everyone wants to know, how can you get a larger allocation amount? Now, these two are not guaranteed to give you more allocation. However, they could boost it because the CDFI has their own threshold for investments, and they've committed to a certain level in non-metropolitan counties. And so they're going to use the applicants in order to meet that requirement. So if you are also able to invest in new non-metropolitan counties, look at your service area. Do they include any areas that would be non-metro? Is that something that you could develop and that you would be positioned well to invest in. That could possibly increase your allocation. And then innovative investments. So what are you doing in your investing to set your organization apart? There's multiple options for innovative. The one that we see most frequently is underserved states. These states are found in the FAQ document, and they're updated annually. So these states are ones that have received fewer dollars of QLICs in proportion to their statewide population residing in low-income communities. So you might see a state in there that seems like a really big one that's gotten lots of allocation, but it's more looking at the proportion of their state getting the dollars of QLICs. And so that's why some of those bigger states that seem pretty well served are still included in those lists every year. Some of the other options are small dollar QLICs or investing in federal Indian reservations. Okay, and then there's 2 priority questions. So these are important to answer. Does your 5-year track record include financing disadvantaged businesses and communities? And then will you use your NMTC allocation to invest in businesses unrelated to the applicant? So these are priority questions that come with points. So these are important to hit. And then we'll move into part 2. Again, this is in the first round of reading, and this is also a scored section, and these are the community outcomes. So the biggest thing is you're going to look at the locations of your pipeline and see whether or not they're located in a qualifying area. So there's 2 layers on this slide. So the initial one is qualifying just in general for new markets, but then there's another level where you would be considered higher distress investing. So that would either meet one of the higher levels of poverty, unemployment, lower median family income, or maybe be a non-metropolitan county, or it would need to meet 2 of some lower level characteristics such as brownfields or medically underserved areas or food deserts. The important thing to note here, though, is that those criteria, because you have to meet 2 of them, there's also additional kind of issues with each of them. So for example, if you're saying that you're in a medically underserved area, if your project is not providing a healthcare service, then that doesn't really apply to your project. So you could be in that area, but just make sure it aligns with what your project is providing. Same thing with food desert, as well as FEMA. That one has a time limit of about 36 months, and it has to be at both levels of assistance, public and individual. Now, with the last round, we got an even deeper layer of distress to focus on. So this is another level of commitment that you can address. And it's a much higher level of poverty, unemployment, and lower median family income. There's also alternatives to meet this deep distress, which are new market tax credit native areas, high migration rural counties, or US island areas. So these are just another way to show that you are investing in these deeply distressed areas. And so this is another layer of commitment that you can make in this application. Now, I think we have our next poll. So getting to know you guys a little bit more, we know who you are, but now what's kind of your thought process here that you're in this webinar? Are you a new organization that's kind of trying to feel out what you're doing? Are you a group that's working on collecting data, or you don't have enough internal resources, or maybe other? Feel free to drop in the chat to share a little bit about what your needs are for this webinar. Okay, great. Well, that's great. A lot of others, but that's good. We did have a small range here. New organizations, a few of you here, and not collecting enough data. Yep, that's an issue that we run up into. Okay, great. This is really helpful. So the next section is going to be taken up by Ethan Gilberti, another writer on our applications. He's going to start with the biggest question, community outcomes.
All right, thank you, Julia. So we just went over the types of areas that CDEs must target. So the next section of part 2 is where we talk about the types of community outcomes that CDEs will target. Now, do not be alarmed by the sheer number of outcomes here. You by no means have to or should target each individual outcome. Instead, choose the ones that best align with your investment strategy. Now, a few notes about these outcomes. If you choose job creation, then you will also have to choose quality jobs and accessible jobs. Quality jobs are usually defined as jobs that pay above a living wage, as well as offer additional benefits and training, while accessible jobs are those that are targeted towards low-income people, low-income residents, or individuals with other employment barriers. Now, the difference between commercial goods and services and community goods and services is that commercial is more along the lines of retail and grocery stores, while community is closer to YMCAs and healthcare facilities. You can also choose to target certain types of project ownership, such as native-owned or minority-owned businesses. And the housing units outcome is predominantly for sale affordable housing, but there are ways to do rental units. And environmentally sustainable outcomes are those that reduce the cost of energy, such as certain green building standards like being LEED certified. So now that you've chosen which outcomes you would like to target, now you need to figure out how to measure those outcomes. To do so, you'll need to gather some methods and metrics. The way the CDFI Fund delineates these two terms is that methods are the way you get those original impact numbers, such as through an intake form, while metrics are the baseline through which you validate or refine those original numbers, such as through number of jobs per square foot. And the last step in part 2 of the application is explaining to the CDFI Fund why you are targeting these business types and community outcomes. And the answer should be through community engagement. Now, the types of community engagement that you perform will vary based on the size of your service area. But whether you are a local, a regional, or a national CDE, you will need to explain how you have identified these problems within the community. Do members of your staff attend local charrettes or community meetings? Does your CDE have a community needs questionnaire that you send out to local stakeholders? Or do you have field agents that are acting as boots on the ground to engage with your community personally? You will also need to show that the community has identified these problems, oftentimes through neighborhood revitalization plans or state economic development plans. But regardless of your strategies, your biggest resource should always be your advisory board. So as you're building your advisory board, make sure to choose individuals that are accountable to the low-income communities within your service area and that are in touch with stakeholder needs. Now, throughout this section of the application, you're going to have a lot of information to convey to the reader. And the trick is to really marry your passion for community development with data. Now, there are two types of data that the CDFI Fund will be looking for, and that is quantitative data, which are the concrete numbers such as poverty or unemployment rates, as well as qualitative data, which are the concepts, experiences, and motivations, such as proof of community support. By combining these two types of data, the CDFI Fund will be able to verify and trust that the community outcomes that you are targeting are a vital concern that need to be addressed. And to sort of summarize all of this, at the end of part 2, you should have a list of pipeline projects that have financing gaps only you can fill. And these projects should have strong local support because they will provide essential impacts to the community. And these impacts will only occur if the CDFI Fund provides you with a new markets allocation. And now we're going to be moving on to the third part of the application, which is focused on your organization's management capacity. By this point, you've already communicated to the CDFI Fund everything you can about the needs of the community and how you plan to support those needs. Now it's time to prove to the CDFI Fund that you are a stable and sustainable organization that will be able to responsibly manage the amount of funding that you're asking for. While parts 1 and 2 are for the CDFI Fund to determine whether or not you should get an allocation, parts 3 through 5 are for the fund to determine how much allocation your organization can reasonably undertake. So your organization may be wonderful at working in the community and have a great investment strategy. However, you'll also need to show that you have the ability to sustainably see this strategy through at the scale that you just described in parts 1 and 2. You will have to show that you have the manpower, the experience, as well as the policies and systems in place to identify pipeline, perform that initial underwriting and due diligence that you spoke on earlier, effectively structure transactions and raise the requisite capital, as well as perform the necessary asset management and compliance for the next 7 years of that QEI's life cycle. And part of that sustainability is making sure that you have the necessary finances to pay for your operations over the next 7 to 10 years. In this section of the application, you will have to provide the CDFI Fund with a realistic budget of what your operations are going to look like if you win that award. How much will this program cost you? And how will you be able to cover those costs? Well, that's going to come from your fee structure, which you'll outline in the application. These fees can vary and cover upfront costs at the time of closing. They can be charged over time to cover routine annual compliance and asset management. And you can charge fees at the back end to cover any expenses that come from unwinding a transaction. When planning your budget, make sure that your costs are reasonable and based upon real estimates and historic costs. Some major costs to factor in will be your personnel, staff, or any consultants, any and all legal or accounting fees, and you can even factor in additional services like community outreach events. And this leads us really well into part 4 of the application, which is all about your capitalization strategy. So what is your capitalization strategy? When you receive an allocation, you're going to have to make sure that your projects have the necessary leverage to finance a QEI. This leverage can be in multiple forms, such as equity, grants, and debt, both below and at market. So you need to show the CDFI Fund that you have experience raising all of these types of capital. By that same virtue, you're going to have to sell these tax credits to investors, such as banks. So you need to show that you have strong relationships with those types of investors, usually in the form of commitment letters or letters of support. Then, once you've shown that you're able to capitalize these investments, you're going to have to show in this section how your QEIs are going to benefit all the parties involved. This includes the investor, you as a CDE, any unaffiliated end users, and most importantly, the Qualic B. And lastly, sometimes your investment just won't be enough to cover the financing gap for some of those larger projects. So if you're a CDE that plans on investing in these larger scale projects, you need to show how you plan to work as a team with other CDEs to finance these investments in a way that doesn't overburden the Qualic B with fees and expenses. And now to wrap up your application, you may have a few more open items to cover. Part 5 of the application will cover the status of any prior awards that you've received from the CDFI Fund and whether or not you've been consistent with your previous allocation, if you've won one. You'll also be including several exhibits with your application that will include important data such as your pipeline of projects, your track record of Kalicki and non-Kalicki-like investments, and biographical information on your key staff and boards. As I mentioned earlier, you may also need to provide and secure investor letters to show that you have support from those strong banking relationships. And lastly, you'll need to have an organizational chart that breaks down the staff and board structures of your organization. Now, let's fast forward and say that you've won an award. Cheers, applause, all that hoopla. Well, that allocation is then going to be tied to an allocation agreement. And this agreement will set the parameters on your deployment based on what you said in your application. So let's go over some of the major parameters. You'll have a defined service area. So if your CDEs stated that your service area was just the state of Idaho, you shouldn't then go looking at deals in New York. If you said you would only invest in Qualic Bs, it's going to be harder to start providing QEIs to other CDEs instead. You'll be committed to providing these Kalicki's with flexible rates and terms that you've committed to within the application. You'll have to fulfill those promises that you made to non-metro counties, innovative investments, areas of higher and deep distress, and you'll be beholden to any notable relationships that you mentioned, as well as your fee structure. So let's dig in a little more about what happens when you win that award. Well, let's first go over the timing. Once the awards are announced, it's going to take a few months for you to get that allocation agreement and unlock those funds. So make sure that you're using those months wisely. For instance, if you want to strike while the iron is hot and immediately apply for the next round of new markets, you're going to have to hit the ground running and make sure that you meet any CDFI Fund deployment threshold requirements. Make sure that you're staying engaged with your partners, staff, and consultants so that you can start implementing your deployment strategy from the get-go. Keep in touch with those projects that you wrote about in your application and see if they're ready for funding. But you should be ready to pivot and switch out projects in case one has fallen behind on timing or maybe is now fully funded by some other program. Speaking of switching out projects, it's important to note that the pipeline you put in your application is not set in stone. For instance, you may not receive the full amount of allocation that you asked for, in which case it would be pretty hard to fund all of the projects that you put in your application. But just like how your application pipeline is meant to be representative of your future deployment, your deployment should be representative of that application pipeline, meaning that you'll have to balance those business types and community outcomes that you wrote about, but you'll also need to hit those benchmark commitments on higher and deep distress. Not to mention if you have any other commitments to non-metro areas or innovative investments like underserved states, it can be a lot to juggle. So that's where a clear investment strategy paired with a strong team of staff and consultants can come in handy. Now, we mentioned that your projects should have targeted community outcomes. So how do you get those tracked? Similar to how a CDE has their allocation tied to an allocation agreement, a project's QEI will be tied to a community benefits agreement. And this agreement will help to make sure that these outcomes are both tracked and met. So when you're designing your community benefits agreement, it's important to keep in mind who will be involved in collecting that data. What data do you want tracked? What are those baseline metrics that will determine if those outcomes are being met? How will you track these results, and how often will you be collecting that information? And similar to how projects will be reporting back to the CDE will be reporting back to the CDFI Fund to prove that what you are doing is in line with your allocation agreement. You will have to track and report how much allocation you have remaining, any multi-CDE projects. CDEs will have to submit ILRs or institution level reports, which are broad overviews of a CDE's financial health, organizational structure, and overall activities. And then there are TLRs, or transaction level reports, which provide a more detailed look at each individual investment made by a CDE using its allocation. And then there are other routine reporting, such as audits, QEI closeout reports after those 7 years of compliance, and whenever you eventually dissolve your individual sub-CDEs. And that brings us to our next polling question, which is, what is your organization's greatest area of need? Where do you think your organization has the largest gap that will need to be filled before you apply for new markets? Is it finding pipeline? Is it the capacity to write a new markets application? Is it the ability to manage and report on that allocation? Or is it something else? If so, tell us in the chat. So we'll give you about a minute to answer that polling question. And then it's going to bring us full circle back to Laurel.
Thanks, Ethan, and thanks, Julia. It's great to set the foundation and think about where we're starting, and then take a stab at getting your thoughts on paper, and then come back to that paper as you get ready to deploy. So it looks like we have a really good split between finding pipeline, capacity, and maybe something else. So if you have something else, feel free to send something in the chat or Q&A, or reach out to us after this webinar if you have questions and want to follow up. One of the things I often think about is, where are we going? Setting that foundation and that intentionality when you start a process. Where is it you're intending to go, and how long will it take you to get there? So one of the things we're going to cover is planning for the costs. So of course, new market tax credits is wonderful because it brings a much needed resource. We haven't talked too much about new market tax credits in particular, because if you're on this webinar, we hope that you've attended one of our other webinars about what new market tax credits are and how they're used and the benefit to the community. But I'll hover over that for just a moment. So the idea behind new market tax credits is that it brings that much needed resource into a low-income community, those resource-deprived communities across our nation, and it allows for that gap to be filled in that community to bring jobs or community goods and services. As Ethan mentioned in part 2 of the application, you're going to have to talk about what kind of missing element are you finding in the communities you serve, and how do you bring that element in with the funding that the new market tax credit program will bring. New market tax credits as a resource is a 39% credit, but it is a credit that's taken over 7 years of time. So one of the things that's really important to remember when you're starting to think about new market tax credits is that this is a longer commitment than just write an application, see if you win, and if you don't like it, you can just go ahead and put that aside and be done with it. It is a 5-year commitment to build a track record of projects that are like the kind of projects that you want to seek new market tax credit funding for. So you have to have grit and determination to start and build on what you've been doing, and then see a need within your community that you can't fill with the resources you have as a community development entity or a CDFI, and say new market tax credits could help me meet more of the needs within my community. Once you've built that foundation over that 5-year period, you have to then commit for a year-long process. If you were to write an application and start thinking about it the day the NOAA is released, the Notice of Allocation Availability, that's about a 2-month, 60-day process. And then there's a wait period. So you've got at least a year-long period. And that's if you weren't planning and doing work ahead of time, which frankly, if you're wanting to be successful, you'll probably need to be. So it's about a 1.5-year process to write a successful application and then wait for the funding to come from the government. So, okay, we're talking about 6 years. We've already been working for 6 years before we even get that first new market tax credit award. So we've already talked about a lot of things that must have been going on. Those all cost money. So you have to have a staff, internal people, you have to have processes, procedures in place to be successful in writing an application. And then new market tax credits level up. So they level you up with both the cost, because now there's needing to be somebody that is deploying new market tax credits in accordance with all of those honeydew promises. Anything you said in the application, you need to measure it. You need to know if you are passionate about it, you think your community needs it, you need to then collect reporting on it. See if you've changed what is happening in the community. See if you are actually producing the impacts that you intended to produce. So that takes an individual's time to collect the reporting. Again, we talked about building that pipeline. So that's a person out in the community along with your advisory board members and other members of the community, but that's somebody in the community sitting with people in the community on the same side of the table, helping them understand how this resource can be a gap filler for their project and meet the needs collectively of the community. So we're talking about a lot of different things that have to happen to be successful, and also a lot of different things that are then costs to employ and have this program. So thinking about how to bring about a successful new market tax credit program, often there is an organization that's been doing lending in the community, or a government agency that's been providing some sort of funding into the low-income community. So there is already a program, a process, and some foundation to build upon. But then you need to think about, does the new market tax credit program require you to staff up, hire somebody else internally, be that person that monitors the pipeline, be that person that helps with closings, and be that person that then collects the data? And frankly, is that one person, or is that 3 people I just mentioned? So all of these things are very important for you to plan for when you're doing the budgeting process. And then part of the story that you're telling in writing an application is that budget. It is, how much do things cost? Who's going to do what? That's the management capacity section, is who's going to do what? What's the cost of doing it? And frankly, are we going to have to hire external resources to help us, or do we have the internal team to manage to all of the expectations that we've set for ourselves and the community within the application? So planning for that cost of success is an important factor to think about when you're really starting out. And so sustainability is really important, because if it takes at least 5, 6, 7 years to get your first new market tax credit award, and you've been doing work within the community for all of that time, there is a cost of that work. And you need to plan for that and make sure that you are budgeting sustainably and taking enough of a fee. I know one of the things that I didn't really introduce myself, apologies for that. I've been doing this work for 25 years as a tax lawyer to begin my career, and as a leader of a CDE for 11 years, and now in my role as the leader of this team. One of the things that is amazing is seeing people around the room that have been in this community, that have been working in this area for 20 plus years, like I have. It takes grit and determination. It's not for the faint of heart, but it is important to keep steady and keep going, because going back into the community time and time again lets the community trust you, lets the community bring you ideas and really be open, and that makes you more successful. As we talked about, both Julia and Ethan mentioned in different parts of the application, how bringing the community together, being a convener and being that intermediary that understands the needs of the community and how this resource can fill those needs, is a huge, important task and a huge role. And the CDFI Fund wants you to be sustainable. They want you to take a fee enough that you will be around for that foundation building period, and then 7+ years in the future. So there are a few CDEs that get money for a particular purpose, a particular reason. And once that reason is completed, they do wind up. So there are some CDEs that have gotten money and haven't continued to apply regularly and gone back out into the community and continue to grow. There are some some organizations that have gotten the funding and found that this was just not for them. So there are some organizations that come in for a reason, a season, but a lot of the community development entities that come into this program are really coming in for the lifetime work of the fact that they're mission driven. They're here, they're about this work, and they want to be here for the long haul. So with all of that in mind, leadership buy-in is imperative. You must have that mission, vision, values alignment that will sing through your application, and it will be the balance to the data. It's important that you have the data that shows the CDFI fund, what you're going to do, how you're going to do, how you will measure success. But if you're going to move people both within your organization and with external from your organization, you must have mission, vision, values alignment that tells the world who you are, what you're doing, and why you're here for the long haul. Again, 7 years of compliance period means that if you do get an award and you only want one award, you're going to be around for at least 8 years. Getting the money from the CDFI fund is the starting point. You have to sign an allocation agreement, which usually takes between 60 to 90 days, and with reduced staffing could take even several months. So in last year, when the awards were announced, it took people until the end of the year, early part of the following year to get their allocation agreements. That is about 60, 90, 120 days. It could take even longer this year if there's a reduced staff within the CDFI fund, which means that they don't have as much time to review, and so review will take longer. So you'll have a longer period of time to wait to get your allocation agreement, and then that's when you can start actually giving the money out into the community and making your equity investments within the community in the form of loans or equity investments into qualified active low-income community businesses. And again, if any of these terms are a hold up for you, please see one of our prior sessions where we went into the deeper dive into new market tax credit basics. So the CDFI fund wants to know that you'll be around because they are deputizing you to monitor the impacts within the community. So do you need new staff? Do you need an update on your policies and procedures? Do you need to understand more of this particular type of underwriting, how it may be different from the product you're already using? So sustainability is a key term that we need to make sure that you are covering. Okay, with all of that in mind, deep breath. We've covered what the application is and how challenging it might be to get one. Who should do this work? Do you have the team players on your staff? Do you have the internal team? Do you have the bandwidth right now to have a salaried person be around to be shepherding this program? Do you have a writer on staff that has understanding of the passion, the mission, vision, values that they need to bring off the page? Do you have somebody that's monitoring your data and can pull that out and describe that in the detail that's necessary in the community impact sessions and others? Do you have the team in your team? Or do you have some seed or element of that team and you need to hire external resources? This is not unique for new market tax credits, but because new market tax credits is a little bit of a more detailed program, let's put it that way, there's more often an external component. So as I mentioned, I started off as a lawyer for 11 years before I ran a community development agency of my own, and I didn't do it alone. No one person can really successfully do all of this by themselves because it takes a village to have that outreach into the community, to monitor and track what's going on in the community and then understand the needs and make sure you're meeting those needs. So you can have a staff, you can have, as Ethan mentioned, boots on the ground. If you have a development company and you have other people out in the community, if you have a lending organization and you have loan officers that are already deeply embedded in the community, you can rely upon other staff members that don't have to have that deep knowledge of new market tax credits to help you understand your community and the needs and help connect you to the borrowers that you will then make new market tax credit investments in. However, again, a lot of organizations find that in order to make sure that they're ready and they can flex their internal and external obligations, will hire a company to do parts of this process. So some people we've worked with in the past really just need compliance. So they have somebody who is a great writer, they have somebody who is going out and finding that track record. They can match their track record to their pipeline, and they've got that part of the puzzle solved. But what they really need is somebody then to monitor that compliance period throughout the 7-year compliance period. Some people have a really great mission, vision, values leader and somebody who's understands lending, but they really don't have the depth or the time to understand the intricacies of some of the new market tax credits. So some people actually really what they need is somebody to take all of their data and all of their details and pull that into a cohesive story to weave that together to fill out all the application and make sure they're not missing any of the elements throughout the story and throughout the application. So it's a variety of ways that you can skin the cat, so to speak, but putting together your team and making sure that you have that team when writing the application, this is an important element, because if you don't have the team together, then you can write an amazing part 1 and part 2, those sections that talk about your product and what your track record and pipeline are and what your community impacts will be. But if your section 3 management capacity shows that you don't have the capacity to take in all the compliance and keep up with your borrowers, then it's unlikely that CDFI Fund will give you a large award, and they may choose to not fund you at all. So put together the team, make sure you have everything that you need on that team when you're writing the application, because you don't want to just say, oh, I will get the award and then I will think about it, because that will be clear to the CDFI Fund that you don't really have it covered. And that may be a really big detriment to your overall goal of getting funding. This is where I'll just speed through the last part. So I slowed down and really wanted to make sure everybody caught up with the idea that this has to be a holistic thought. You have to have that strategic planning that goes into the beginning of your thought process with an application. And this is one of the things that we do. This is one of the things that gets me up and gets me excited about my job. We have a team of 15 people that help organizations with raising, deploying, and managing capital. And what that really means to us is we help you find the foundation, set that foundation for your organization, figure out what you do have internally, what you need as far as resources externally, and then help you get to the next level, get to the next iteration of your goals. I'll just hover over briefly the services provided. These are all on the website, so please don't worry about trying to write these down. If you want any more information, feel free to reach out to us. We have a team that leads project finance. What that means is anybody in the community that needs help with attracting new market tax credits to a project, we can help be that guide. We have management compliance services. So after the new market tax credit closing, and everybody takes a deep sigh of relief. Oh, we got to the end result and the money is deployed into the community. Well, that's just the starting point of the compliance period. And so we have a team that will help with that part, making sure that they collect all the data and that gets translated to both the investors and the CDFI Fund. And again, if you don't know where you are, we can start at the very beginning and just build that foundation with you. Think about writing a certification if you don't have that. Think about helping you with your 1, 3, and 5-year plan, lining up whether you have a track record that's suitable for new market tax credits or whether you need to take a few years and build that track record before applying for the first round. So we can help you wherever you are. And now we are on our last polling question. We have delivered upon everything we had hoped to do today, and we hope you've enjoyed your session. So if you have come and we picked some questions and you are just thinking to yourself, you said some interesting things there, but I need a little bit more time, we would be happy to reach back out with you, set a follow-up meeting. If you just came and you got everything you needed, then perfect. We do this because it's a benefit to the community to let people know about this program. We don't charge for this on purpose because we really want everybody to be able to join us, understand some of the new market tax credit basics, and get something they can take back to their community. So answer this, and this will be, if you now have answered at least 3 polling questions, this will be the last thing you need to do to check off that box to get your CPE credit if that is one of the items you came for today. Okay, so I just wanted to hover over this last slide, which again, I've mentioned that we've had 3 other sessions prior to today where we talked about new market tax credit basics. We've talked about empowering communities and the CDEs view of new market tax credits. We've talked about strategic foundation building. So we've gotten multiple sessions done. These are actually evergreen though. So we leave these up year after year. So we try to make sure that we're providing new content every year and that we leave those sessions up from last year in case there's something that we covered last year that might be really what you're looking for. So please look on the Cherry Bekaert website. These are the ones from this year and we have last year's sessions up as well. I believe that will take us to the end of our time together. And so I'll just end by saying thank you so much for joining us. We hope you enjoyed this session of the Strategic Financing Services speaker series. If you have any feedback, we would very much welcome that. So we will send a short survey out after this session. And if you have any feedback, positive, negative, or just you want to hear something else from us next year, we are, as soon as we get finished, we will now start thinking about next year. So if you have any thoughts of what we didn't cover, but you really wish we would, please send us those thoughts as well while they're on your mind. The recordings will take about a week to be finalized and get up on the website. So it'll be out there in about the same amount of time as you should be getting your CPE certificate. So thank you so much for joining us. And we are giving you a few minutes back in your day to hopefully give some thought to some of the topics we've covered. And we hope to hear from you soon.